I've never been asked this question. Man, this question is going to make me cry. If it wasn't for my family, I wouldn't be here. I can tell you that wholeheartedly. So the way that I look at them is they are the oxygen in my lungs. And without them, I can't breathe, you know?
Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and love. Now more than ever, our world needs strong and courageous and compassionate men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. You see, this movement is called the Dad Nation, but ultimately this is for the wives, the children, and the generations to come, because we believe that every wife and child deserves a father who is pursuing greatness. I am your host, Mitchell Osmond, and I'm so grateful and I'm humbled that you've chosen to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with me today. So I'm glad that you are here with us today, because I know you are going to learn a ton from what me and Larry have to talk about today. And so Larry is a guy that I've known for a couple years. He leads a movement called the Dad Edge, and I consider him to be one of the pioneers in this movement of helping men become better. He was one of the first guys that I seen when I started the Dad Nation, and he was certainly an inspiration for me in the early days. He's written a book that he's just about to release on Father's Day, which we're going to talk about. But here's a little bit about Larry. He's a father of 4 boys, and he's a husband of 18 years. Larry's an author, a leader, a speaker, and a coach. He leads a community of men through his online platform called the Dad Edge, and he mentors hundreds of men in this community. And over the past almost 10 years or so, he's spoken with over 700 experts in various fields. He's the CEO of the Dad Edge Mastermind, and he's the host of the Dad Edge podcast. And the mission of the Dad Edge is to empower men to live and lead legendary lives. The Dad Edge empowers men to create legendary marriages and create epic connections with their kids, master their personal finances, optimize their health, and become a better leader within their family. You guys, we had such a great conversation. We're going to talk about his story and how he got started. We're going to talk about our wives' 3 biggest needs and how to meet them. We're going to talk about the importance of developing skills as a husband and a father, and the importance about being around like-minded men and being in a strong, supportive community. So got a ton of stuff for you today. Grab a pen, grab something to take notes on. All right, let's jump into it. Well, hey, welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, Larry. And hey, I'm so excited that you are with us today. For those of you who are listening, this is round 2. We attempted this at one point, and the internet shut down in my neighborhood, and it was a disaster. But you know what? Here we are, we're back, and that just means this is going to be better this time around. So thanks for taking the time to be with us today, Larry. I know that you're just going to add a ton of value to anybody listening to the Dad Nation podcast. And just a bit of the context for those of you listening, I've been following Larry since probably like within a couple of weeks of starting Dad Nation. Like, you were one of the first accounts that I came across that was doing
Really?
something that I was particularly passionate about. And bro, you actually kind of paved the way in many ways, or inspired me along the way in many senses. And so I just want to thank you, publicly as well, for your inspiration, not just to the thousands and thousands of men that you've helped, but also just personally from my perspective as well. You often don't know all the details of the full extent of your impact, but just so you know, man, you've had such a positive impact on me, my marriage, my fatherhood, and even just starting up Dad Nation. So thank you. Appreciate it, man. So we'd love to have you just tell us a little bit more about yourself. I mean, I know a bunch about you, but my listeners don't. So tell me a little bit about who you are, man, your family, and then the Dad Edge. Like, what started this? What's the genesis story?
Oh, thanks, man. I'm honored to be here. I've been following you as well, and been sharing a lot of your really cool quotes and banners and stuff like that on my story. I didn't even know who you were. I didn't even know who. I didn't know. I was like, I don't know if there's like a team of people behind this IG account. I don't know if there's a dude behind this account. Like, if it could be a bot. I don't know, but like, this is really good stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, I think I followed you, man, for it was probably a year before I was just like, oh, look at that. I was like, it's a real person back there. So yeah, that's it's cool to put a face with a name and to get to know you as a human being. But answer your question, I'm father of 4 boys, 18, 16, 10, and 8. Been married for 21 years. I've known my wife for 28 years. And I'm blessed beyond measure. I don't deserve the amazing things that I have in my life, that's for sure. And I definitely wasn't on the path to have, fulfilling marriage and kids that I'm connected to and all that good stuff. And I mean, as far as how this whole thing got started, I wish I could say it started off, really amazing and pretty and like this Cinderella story in it, but it wasn't. It was very dark. Just to kind of give you some background, the way I was raised. I mean, being a father, having a father, being a father, it's always been something that was is really important to me, ever since I was a kid, and I think it really stemmed from the fact that half my childhood was spent without a father figure at all, and then the other half was usually spent with some clown who is in me and my mom's life. Um, and I'll explain that. So my mom and biological father got married when they were really young, like 21. And my dad was in the military. They moved around a lot. And I mean, they were just kids. And then they had me when they were 25. So like 4 years later. And then their relationship really took a nosedive. And after I was born, I think they were just trying to figure things out. And it was bad. So after about a year, I think I was a year old, they got divorced. I don't remember him whatsoever. Apparently, like I think he had visitation and he had me on the weekends. I don't remember any of it. And I mean, I don't remember like the video camera even like really turning on and the memories until I was about 4. And that's when I knew, like, I went to preschool. My mom was a single mom, single income earner. And I remember dads like coming to pick up like kids from school, like my friends. And I would always see men and dads. I'm like, oh, that's a dad. But like in my mind, moms found dads. Like we just magically appeared and the moms found dads.
Mm.
And my mom hadn't found my dad yet. And I was okay with that. And I'll never forget one day when and I was 4, it was right around the same amount of time. And my mom comes to me one day and she's like, hey, I'm having a friend over for dinner. He's a very special friend and I work with him and I'd like for you to meet him. I think that was her way of like saying, I'm dating somebody I'm working with, right? And I'm ready for you to meet him. And I heard the word he, and I was like, oh my God. I was like, that maybe she found him. Maybe that's the dad, right? And so this guy comes walking in our house, man. Like he's got a 3-piece suit on, like he's got the mustache, handlebar mustache, the feathered hair, briefcase. He was a white collar data software engineer. And he came walking in, and my mom introduced me, and I shook his hand. And the first thing I asked this guy, just beaming, right? I'm looking right up at him. I said, are you going to be my dad?
uh,
And I remember, man, I think my mom like gasped and he just like awkwardly laughed. And but 6 months later, boom, they were married. And I think my mom kind of took that as like a Renee Zellweger, like Jerry Maguire moment, like when the little guy like hugs Tom Cruise and they got married. And I think she had best of intentions, but it was disastrous,
mm,
to say the least. Their marriage ended 5 years later when I was 10. He was a big drinker. He was a nice guy when he was sober, absolute nightmare when he drank, very abusive, physically, mentally, emotionally. Same with my mom. And then after when I was 10, I remember them getting divorced and I was like, man, that sucks. Like
mm,
I don't have a dad, but I was also somewhat relieved at the same time. I was like, well, I'm not going to hear him fight anymore. And this guy's not going to hit me anymore. And so my mom just dated and that kind of thing. And fast forward 2 years later, I serendipitously ran into my biological father by mistake. I had no idea. I actually had no idea I had a biological father until after their divorce. And I asked my mom, I'm like, wait a second, like this guy didn't come into my life until I was 5. Where did I come from? She told me. And then a couple years later, I met him. And turns out he only lived like 3 miles from us. He was remarried at the time, 2-year-old son, another one on the way. And I was freaking overjoyed, man. I could not get enough of hanging out with my dad. Like I saw him every week. He came to my little league games. Like it was awesome. And then about 6 months into the relationship, I just sort of felt like this distancing happening. I just didn't really know what it was. I mean, I'm older now and I get it now. And I think for him, it was a bit much and he just didn't know how to handle it. And there was a lot of things going on. He was trying to start his life over. And I remember calling him one day and I was like, hey, I sense something's wrong. I didn't say it like that, but I was like, is there something wrong? Like, I feel like something's not right. And I don't even know what was said in that conversation. All I know is that was the end of our relationship and he left
Mm.
again. And I don't know if like he left or we just parted ways. And then my mom just, I mean, I was dark for me, man. Like I just kind of like gave up. Like I failed the eighth grade. I had to do eighth grade twice. I overate. I got fat. I was a fat kid. I did go on to high school. I went on to college. I got my degree. I met my wonderful wife, got into a really lucrative career with a medical device, which I really loved. But my mom was married a total of 3 times and just a revolving door of guys in between those marriages that were just absolutely toxic. And the guys that she was married to were pretty toxic as well. So it was like when I first got married, I was like, I was like, what is this going to be like? Right. And then fatherhood for me, man, was terrifying. I didn't know what to do. All I knew is I didn't want to fail at it.
Mm.
So again, serendipitously, when I was 30, something really interesting happened. Number one, we were pregnant with our first son, who's now 18. And number two, I was in a coffee shop in St. Louis for a meeting. And I don't know what it was, but somebody walked through the door. I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my dad. And I hadn't seen him in 18 years.
Wow.
And he just came in to get his morning coffee. And that interaction has now turned into almost a 19-year relationship. I don't call him dad. I don't know if that's fitting for our relationship. I introduce him as my dad, but I call him by his name. I think that would be awkward for both of us, but he's still married to the same woman. I have 2 younger half brothers. Um, but for me, Dad Edge got started because I was lost. I was so lost, man. And I had a lot of trauma and baggage in my head and my heart. And I made a promise to myself that when I had kids, I was never going to hit them out of anger because I knew what that felt like. Dad Edge got started because I broke that promise, man. And when my 4-year-old, he's now 16, he's my second born, he stepped out of line as any 4-year-old would. And I reacted, lost patience, just reacted. I swatted him on the butt. And unfortunately, he fell over. And when he fell over, I was like, oh my God, what did I just do? And then I went to go pick him up. And this image is like burned in my brain, man. It still actually will wake me up in the middle of the night. Um, I went to pick him up and he rolled over and he looked at me and he just put his hands up like this,
Mm.
like, don't hurt me. And I was just like, oh my God, like, what have I done? And I never had done anything bad as a dad, but I didn't really do a whole lot of good either. I was just sort of like in this limbo, like sort of half in, half out of it. And I'll never forget my wife telling me one day, she was like, you have everything in you to be an amazing father and a great husband. You're just not letting yourself.
Mhm.
And that was it. I just relentlessly doubled down and I just tried to gobble up and learn everything I could about being a better man, better husband, better father. And that journey turned into a blog and then it turned into a podcast and now it's turned into a community and a movement and I'm blown away by that because I'm still an idiot at times. I'm still a moron. I'm just less than a moron than I was, but that's how it started. I wish I could say it was great, but that's how it started.
Wow, man, thank you for sharing that. That's a powerful story, and it's one that takes courage to share, and especially publicly like this. I know enough about myself and men that uh, many of us struggle with vulnerability and honesty and true transparency, accountability, some of these things, and
Yeah.
and so the fact that you know are willing to share that and be that honest and open, I appreciate it, man. I know that by simply speaking things out, getting it pulls them out of the dark and into the light and removes the power from them. And so thank you for sharing that, because I know that there are going to be men who listen to this and have made maybe similar mistakes and will feel like, okay, he's not beyond hope, then I'm not beyond hope. And so thank you for sharing that, man. I appreciate about you and that about you. And that's one thing that I love about what you do and your content and just your overall countenance, man. It's just you approach this whole thing with humility and honesty. You're not cocky, arrogant, and you're quick to say, hey, I don't have this figured out. I mean, if anybody in this space could say, I figured some things out, it's you. But you're just so humble, and man, I so appreciate that, because you're paving the way, you're modeling the way, that I believe that every man should live, right? So thank you. Appreciate that, man.
Thank you back. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Hey, I promise we're going to get back to this episode, but I just wanted to take a few seconds to tell you about a free marriage course that I'm offering, no charge, and it's called Remodel Your Marriage. And it's a 4-step blueprint to understanding your wife, keeping your cool, and getting the fire back in your marriage. And in this course, we're going to dig into the 4 foundations that every successful couple understands well. And that's number 1, how to love each other well. Number 2, how to feel and how to communicate how you feel, how to communicate through conflict. Number 3 is how to fight fair and how to fight well. And then number 4 is how to have fun and to break out of that routine of becoming just really great roommates. And so if you're watching this and maybe you would say that your marriage is feeling a little stale, maybe needs a little remodeling or refreshing, all you need to do is head to dadnationco.com/remodel for that free course for you, my friend. I put a lot of time and energy into it, and I believe that it can help you transform your marriage. I believe in the marriage model. I believe in you and your marriage, my friend. All right, let's get back to the episode. And I know that you're releasing a book, which I want to get into a little bit later. But I know that for many of the people listening, this is going to be their first experience hearing from you, Larry. And so, and those listening, Larry spent, as he said, years and years being a father, being a husband, but talking with men through the podcast, with the community, the movement, leading men, teaching. And so you've probably learned many, many things about fatherhood, about how to lead yourself, about how to lead in your marriage and how to respect and honor your wife. And so just for the sake of this episode, I thought it would be really cool for you to share, from your experience and years of doing this and walking with men, what are some like top tips that you could give men and top little nuggets, I guess, of advice that you could give any fathers and husbands listening? Maybe it's around fatherhood, maybe it's about your marriage, or maybe it's about how you lead yourself as a man. Like, why don't you just share with us some of the main things you've learned?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for that. I think if I were to if I were to rewind the tape and just think of my mentality even towards marriage and family and kids and all that, like I always thought that like, well, this stuff has to come naturally, right? And if it doesn't, maybe I'm just not cut out for it or we're not cut out for it, right? And I think a lot of us have that perception. In fact, I remember being younger and I think, people getting therapy, coaching, counseling, mentoring is really widely accepted now, which I think is great, right? But when I was younger, like if your parents were in therapy, oh dude, and your people like you went to school with found out about it, oh you're a broken home, man. Like you belong on Jerry Springer, like that kind of thing, right? You guys are just headed towards a dead end, right? And but I think that has really flipped on its head a little bit. I don't think we're all the way there yet, but I think we're getting closer like every day. But I think anything that we are good at in life, like you're a pastor. Like you didn't wing that. You had to study it. You had to know it. You have to know the word of God. You have to know scripture, right? And not to mention the fact that even if you know that stuff, you also have to learn how to be a great like presenter, right? You have to be engaging as a speaker in order for people to hear you and that kind of thing. That usually does not, well, the speaker part usually doesn't come naturally. It can, but definitely not the knowledge piece. Like you got to learn that stuff. A surgeon spends 8 years in school and then 2 years of fellowship and residency, right? Even an electrician goes through an apprenticeship, right? And then before he's a journeyman. Being a police officer, it takes at least a minimum of 6 months. A fire academy, if you're a firefighter, you have to go through the fire academy. Like these things, you don't wing them, right? You learn them. But for some reason, the perception has been for so long that, well, you don't learn fatherhood, you don't learn marriage, right? You wing that, right? Like you figure it out. Like, don't worry, you'll figure it out. Best time of your whole life. Think of it this way. We actually let's talk about marriage for a second. We plan more for that one day, all the things that go into that one day, and we don't plan for the marriage.
It's true.
Hardly at all. Like, I mean, think about even if we learned communication skills. Like, so for instance, I wish someone would have told me years ago, Hey, your wife's three biggest needs is to feel seen, heard, and safe.
Mm-hmm.
And here's how you make her feel seen. Here's how you make her feel heard. And here's how you make her feel safe. And oh, by the way, your three biggest needs are to feel respected, appreciated, and validated. And here's how she can do that. Here's how a woman usually communicates. Here's how a man communicates, right? When your wife comes and vents to you, that doesn't mean she wants you to solve her problems. That means she's trying to connect with you, right? Things like that, that you're just like, I remember, I'm not even kidding. I sound like such a jerk saying this. I remember in the first couple years of our relationship and marriage, Jessica would come to me and talk to me, and I'd give her advice. And she's like, "You're not listening to me." I'm like, "Yes, I am." And she'd be like, "Well, I don't need advice. I just need you to hear me." And I literally told her this, man. And I can't even believe this woman didn't hit me upside the head. I'd be like, "You know what? If you don't want my advice, don't talk to me." And I'm like, I can't, that would never come out of my mouth now. I can't believe that came out of my mouth then, but I didn't know what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
It took all this learning. So that's a long way to say it's okay to learn it. In fact, I encourage you to learn it. Read books, gobble up podcasts, right? Go to therapy, get a coach, be in mentorship. Like those things are so important. The more you learn, the more you know, the more you grow, the better that those relationships will get. I can promise you that. If you go at it by winging it, it's going to be an incredible, frustrating journey for you.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. That's been my experience as well, man. Our marriage really didn't turn around until I got intentional. A little bit of my story is 3 years in, we hit rock bottom, and it was a conversation about having kids. And I remember, I'll never forget, just sitting on the couch and talking to my wife and saying, we're talking about, should we have kids? When should we have kids? And I'd said, there's not a chance in the world that I would ever bring a child into this relationship. I mean, it's not fair to them, because it was so toxic. And of course, I didn't realize in that moment, but I had all kinds of baggage that I brought into the marriage. I was overweight. We were in a significant amount of debt. There was just a ton of things stacked against us. And that feeling of like, I think it was that when I spoke those words out, like, I don't think we're healthy enough to even be able to foster a human life, in this. And that was, we just said, hey, if things don't change, like, this is over.
Yeah.
And it was the next day that I woke up and I said, I have to take ownership. I have to own my mistakes. I have to start to learn. And you're right, man. And for me, that was the shift where I jumped in and I started devouring, like, not just marriage books, but self-leadership, finances, fitness, and just like, and that was what started that transformation. But my current level of thinking got me to where I was. And that current level of thinking was not going to get me anywhere different than where I was, right? And so I had to change my way of thinking, elevate it. And so, yeah, man, that was, I say all that to say, I completely agree with you. That's been exactly my experience as well. And just the power of community too, man. Like getting around other men who are also willing to share about their experiences and their pain and their suffering and challenges and things like that in their marriages is hugely helpful. I remember back then, it took me like 6 months to get up the stones to talk to another guy about something that we were struggling with. And I walked into the pub and I was just like so heavy, man. So I thought, well, what is this guy going to think? And I finally get the courage to say, hey, man, this is what I've been struggling with in my marriage. And he looks at me, he's like, so what? Like we've been fighting about that for the past 10 years, this guy said. And I was like, are you kidding me? And she's like, that's totally normal, dude. And so the weight of the world felt like was lifted off my shoulders. And I'm like, oh, so I'm not crazy. So our marriage isn't, broken. I'm not a monster. And it was just an incredible amount of power in that, right? In that mentorship and community. So would you agree? Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I think as soon as you open the door to whatever it is that is going on,
Yeah.
right? And I think once you get past the good, fine, busy, which by the way, I just think that that's hilarious. Those three most common answers we, as men, we sit next to. Hey, man, how you doing? Fine. How's work? Oh, we're busy. How's the family? Oh, they're good. We're fine. And I think as soon as you open up, to a what I would call a like-minded man, because I think that I think there are certain circles that we as men, husband, especially if you're a husband and especially if you're a father, you've got to be, in my opinion and in my experience, because I've experienced both, you've got to be incredibly diligent and purposeful about who you're going to surround yourself with. I'll give you an example. I used to, I put myself through college. I had to pay for it. And I used to come home in the summers and work in this sheet metal shop. And it was summer work and it was a grind. I mean, we're talking like steel boots and hard hat, safety glasses, and you're fixing stuff, cleaning stuff. Like you're basically like the slave of all these like sheet metal workers, right? And it was interesting. Like there were a few guys that had great relationships and that kind of thing when at home, but the majority of them would just complain and rip on their
Yep.
wives, right? Call them names like their old lady and she's a you know
The
what,
ball and
and she
chain.
just the ball and chain, the nag, whatever. I'll do whatever I can not to go home tonight, like type of thing. And I was just like, man, this is like a it's an and when I was younger, I was in college and I was like, man, this is like a really interesting environment. Is this what marriage is kind of all about? And I noticed that I was dating my wife at that time. And we weren't even thinking about marriage yet. We were just in college. And I remember like getting like somewhat jaded a little bit. Like, she's nagging and she's this and she's ball and chain. I want to be out with my friends and all this other stuff. Like all and that was the lens I kind of viewed her through because that's who I was hanging out with. The other thing too is if I really looked at some of the circle of friends that I hung out with in college, like they kind of had very, very similar views. And that was tough to be around. So with that being said, it's that was that was not a good circle to be around
Mhm.
at all. Right.
Mhm.
So so here's what I'll tell you. Once I started surrounding myself with different people, and in 2015, I mean I went at this is another mistake, by the way. Side note before I get to that. I went at life very much alone when I was married and as a dad. So like I didn't have really a close circle of friends. I had more like my college buddies,
Yep.
and they were the guys like you go out drinking with on the weekends and you talk about old times. And that was really about the extent of your relationship. No one really asked about like, hey man, like how are you and Jessica doing? Like how are you and Natalie doing? Like how's your communication? Like how's your intimacy? Are you guys dating? Are you guys arguing? Is everything how is everything with you and Ethan? Like how are you doing connecting to your son? Those conversations never happened,
Mhm.
right? They were always surface level. And it wasn't until, and I think that's a big mistake. Don't, that's another mistake. We need people in our lives to pull us forward, to call us forward, right? And to be like that person in our life that is going to hold us to a higher standard than we hold ourselves,
Mhm.
and vice versa. We are that person for others. I think it was in 2015. It was in 2015. I joined my first mastermind, and I didn't even know what a mastermind was. And I'll never forget it. I joined that, and I'll never forget the guy who headed it up. He was ahead of me in life. He's about 20 years ahead of me in life. Good Christian businessman. Aaron Walker, uh, iron sharpens iron, and he invited me to join his mastermind. And I was like, "What is a mastermind?" And he's like, "It's a group of like-minded individuals that share similar visions, and we help each other with marriage and parenting and business and everything else." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I think I know." So it's just a circle of guys, like a circle of dudes. Like I'm not really understanding this, and he's like, "You just got to experience it." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's up? What's entailed?" And he said, "It's $500 a month, and it's 10 a.m. every Monday. You'll meet with us." And I'm like, $500 a month. I was like, "That this sounds like snake oil to me." Like, man, like, come on, I'm not in a fraternity anymore. I think that was like, and he kind of like laughed. And Aaron was in a mastermind with Dave Ramsey and Ken Abraham for 20
Mm.
years, and we see where those guys have gotten.
Yep.
And so I was like, I don't know if this is for me. He's like, okay. He's like, I get it. He goes, well, I'll tell you what. He goes, I want you to do something for me. And he was from Nashville. So he like had this really cool accent. He's like, I want you to do something for me. He's like, I want you to fast forward your life 1 year from today. 1 year. So Larry, it's November 15th, 2015. I want you to think, what is life going to look like for you in November 15th, 2016?
Mm.
If you don't do a thing different. Not a thing different with your business, not a thing different with your marriage, not a thing different with your kids. And I want you to think about what that's going to cost you. And I was just like, I think he knew where my head was going. So I was like, I never really thought about that because there was a cost associated with being a part of the mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I realized by fast forwarding my life a year from that was there was a bigger cost to not
Exactly.
doing something different. So I was just like, he's like, call me back in 24 hours. I looked at the clock and it was 10:01. I called him back at 10:14. And I said, I'm in. And I had no idea what I was in for. And I was like, I'll try this for a month. And I stayed for a year.
Cool.
And I could not believe the experience of what it was like being around other men who knew you on a deep level, all the good, all the not so good, and would call you forward on things, challenge you on things respectfully, right? Give you advice and strategy. I mean, it was like being in a room of absolute gold
Mm.
because I got to learn things from their experience. I mean, most of these guys were ahead of me in life. I couldn't get enough of it. I couldn't wait until 10 a.m. on Mondays because I knew that for that 1 hour, I was going to get like the best education of my life.
Mm.
And my life drastically improved ever since. And ever since then, like I continue to this day. Every year I invest in a coach or a group or something because I just want to keep learning and keep elevating. I'm not going to do that by not surrounding myself with people who are smarter than me, stronger than me, faster than me, fitter than me, richer than me, have a deeper faith than I do, right? I have to be in rooms where I'm the dumbest guy. I
Mm-hmm.
have to because that's what makes the biggest change in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, and I think deep down, as men, we all crave to be challenged in that way. We all crave to, we have at least for me, I have an aversion to complacency. And if I'm not learning and not growing, I start to just kind of fade away on the inside. And just this, I think what you're saying is the cost of inaction in your life, right? And which is a high cost that we don't always think about. And for me, some questions that I've been asked in the past that's really helped me put things into perspective is around this topic. It's really like number one, which you've heard probably a million times before. If you died tomorrow, would you be okay with the life that you lived? Right? Would you be okay with the marriage your wife had with you? Or for example, what would the 10 years from now version of you tell you to do right now? Would he tell you to keep living the same year over and over and over again? Or would he tell you to do something different? And so it's just this thinking about the future really informs us on how do we live in the present. And you're so right, man. It's being the dumbest guy in the room is so helpful, and it's constantly humbling. You cannot be cocky and arrogant if you're being around men who are just further than you, who are calling you up to a higher standard, right? So I
Agreed.
love that. I love that, man. Thank you for sharing that. You said, now I want to spin back to something you said a little while ago. You said that your wife's biggest needs are to be seen, heard, and safe, right? Did I get that right?
Correct.
Okay. Could you just give us real practically? So we've talked about the power of vulnerability. We talked about the power of being in community with others, being around men who can build you up. Now, when you're specifically talking about marriage, and perhaps a guy's listening and saying, I don't really know what that means. How can I practically help my wife feel seen, heard, and safe? Can you explain maybe some real practical tips on how to do that?
Sure. It's actually it's not as complicated as we like to think it is because I think as men we like to overcomplicate things. Like if it's not really really complicated, then it probably something's wrong or like maybe it's not worth it or we're not doing something right. It's actually quite simple. So like let's take scene for instance. Uh and let's just talk about the human brain, right? The human brain is always looking for what's wrong, broken, and missing. Those are the three things. What's wrong, what's broken, what's missing, right? It's a very fear-based hardware that we have in our brain. And but that's what keeps us alive. The brain's job is to keep us alive. I heard this quote and it made so much sense to me that the brain is the hardware, but the mind is the software. And if we're not upgrading our software on a regular basis, then, we're operating with the iPhone iOS 1.3, not the 17.6 or whatever we're on right now, right? So you always have to be upgrading that software. So you have to override that, because usually what we're doing is we're sort of like scanning family and bills and kids and wife and everything that's happening in our ecosystem for what's wrong, missing, or broken. So, and what that does is think about the mind and the brain as your Wi-Fi bandwidth, right?
Mm.
There's only so much there's only so much bandwidth that it can take. That's why we can somewhat multitask, but we can't multi-focus. Okay. So think of it this way. If I'm always looking for what's wrong, broken, and missing, then it's distracting me from looking through what we call looking through the lens of an appreciative eye,
Mm.
right? And looking through the lens of an appreciative eye is like, so for instance, my wife, I'm taking my kids camping this weekend. Wish me luck on that one. I'm taking 7 boys camping. And I was kind of like stressed out, overwhelmed, because I'm like, man, my calendar's packed this week. I got to get to the store. I got to get this. I got to get that. And my wife, bless her heart, man, went to Walmart and like literally bought all of our food, all of our drinks. And like in her mind, she's like, well, this is just something that I do. And I thought to myself, I was like, oh my gosh. And here's the thing, I haven't thanked her for that yet. And she did that yesterday. I think I said thank you in passing, like, thank you for doing that. Right.
Mhm.
But a way to really and I'm going to do this today, a way to really hit that home is pull her aside and say, I just want to thank you, because I saw that you went to Walmart for me and you picked out every single thing that we could possibly want. And I just want to say thank you for giving your time. Thank you for giving your resources. You could have done anything else with that hour and a half that you spent in that store looking for a camping trip, which, by the way, you're not even going on. Like, thank you for that. I really appreciate you doing that. That makes her feel seen, like something that she did, and me acknowledging that through an appreciative lens of thank you, right, is huge. And that goes miles for her, right? The other one is heard. Now, let's just say, like, look, I'm not trying to stereotype all guys. We're not the best listeners in the world. And I'll tell you why. I'm not saying that it's a broken system of us listening, but we are not the best. And I say that because I think that makes sense to men, because it made sense to me. I'm like, no, I'm listening to every word she's saying, but that's not what she needs. What she really needs is to be validated, like when she's talking. That's what true listening is. So, like, for instance, when my wife is talking to me and I have to override this system because my wife might be talking to me about something that she's struggling with, like in her friend group, or something that's on her mind and heart with the kids or whatever. And I immediately want to stop listening to her so I can think about what can I do to help her,
Mm.
which, by the way, comes from a really good place. We do that because we love our wives, right? We don't want to see them in pain. So we want to solve and help. But that, as soon as we start doing, the way that comes across to her is, you're not listening to me. All you're doing is thinking of how we can fix this, right? And in our minds, in our guys' minds, is like, well, I'm doing the most loving thing I possibly can because I'm trying to help. And what we need to realize is that's not always helpful. Sometimes it is, but usually not. What she really needs is validation,
Mhm.
is for you to create that space with her and be like, man, like, that sounds really frustrating. And I think anybody in your position would be really, really frustrated. And I know I would be. And so, what's the best way I can support you right now? What feels right to you? Do you want to just keep talking? Like, when you do that, right? So what I did in that moment is actually labeled what I think she's probably feeling, which is validation, right? Because as soon as you say what someone's probably feeling, even if you're a man or even if you're a kid, like, that feels really good. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. This person's hearing me. Like, they know what I'm feeling. Like, I can even sense that they're feeling what I'm
Mm.
feeling. Right. And that is that's true listening. So that's hearing her. So the best advice I could give you is, don't just listen for words.
Mm.
Actually search and say out loud what you think she might be feeling. And if you're uncertain, because it's not always that they just need to be validated, sometimes they're like, can you help me figure this out? And in those times, if I don't know, I'll just say, hey, I want to be the best support for you right now. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like. So if you could help me out, that'd be awesome. So if you want me to keep listening and you just want to vent, like, or you want me to listen, I'm totally good with that. And if you want to talk solutions as well, or I'm there for that too. So you tell me what feels right to you. And notice I say the word what feels right to you, not what you think is right, what feels right. Because women are feelers,
Hmm.
right? And when you say what feels right to you, that hits home for them big time. So I'm very choosy with my words because I want my wife to feel heard, right? The other thing too, it's like Captain Obvious, and I've been bad at this in the past. Put the phone down when she's talking to you. Like that's like one of the biggest insults to my wife. And she'll even tell you that. She's like, when you have your phone, when she's like, you think you're listening to me as you're looking down, you're hearing my words, but you're not hearing me. And she's right. So like that's another one.
Mm.
The safe aspect is there's certain different levels of safety. If you see your wife and she feels heard, usually that safety aspect falls like a domino, right? Because she's like, wow, this he sees me, he hears me, so I feel safer. The other thing too, to think of it this way: if you really want to make your wife feel safe, um, be graceful, patient, and responsive with your kids, because there's something really sexy to a woman when a guy can be resilient with kids and not lose his crap on his kids.
Mm.
And man, I've been guilty of that. Me and my 16-year-old had a huge argument last night, and I know that breaks my wife's heart. And but he and I we had some words last night, and I know, because of all the work I've done, I need to address that with her, because I know that didn't make her feel good, right? Even though my son was out of line, but still, um, I need to address that with her, because that doesn't make her feel all warm and fuzzy and safe, even if the situation calls for an argument or a heated discussion in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's good, man. Well, anybody listening, I hope you're taking notes. I mean, you just shared a lot, and these are easy to grasp, I think, in principle, but very sometimes more difficult to live out in the moment. When the pressure's on. But it's so good, man. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Okay, I want to be conscious of our time, and I want to talk about your book because um, I know that as we started off this episode, we talked a lot about the power of learning and growing and reading and sharpening your mind, right? And so I would love to talk a little bit about that, man. So tell us the title and would you mind just kind of sharing a little bit with us about what's in the book and what we can expect?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that, by the way. So this book was by far the most challenging thing I've ever done in
Mm.
this 10-year mission that I've been on here, and it really stretched me to grow. And what I noticed is, as I wrote this, while it came from a foundation of things that I was already doing and being, it really cemented the things that I wasn't doing and being.
Mm.
And which was a huge growth opportunity for me. Anybody out there who's ever written a book, I think they'll probably tell you the same, is that the words that you put down in pages, it's not just some of the things you're practicing, but you're also learning as you're doing it. And then it becomes like, well, if I'm writing this, then this has to become a part of how I operate, right? So the book is called The Spirit of Fatherhood. It's a faith-based Christian approach to fatherhood, but with also elements of, tactical things that we're talking about today, like these tactical earthly things. So I would say it's probably like 50-50 of very practical, tactical things that you can do as a husband and father to be more patient, more forgiving, more resilient, more patient and resilient, and forgiving of yourself, right? With your kids, how to connect with your kids on a very deep level. The funny thing is too, I'll share this real quick. Side note: your kids' needs are the same as your wife, whether they're a boy or a girl. Seen, heard, and safe doesn't matter if you're a teenage boy or not. Seen, heard, and safe. They need those too. So the book really hits home a few different things. Number one, this is for any dad, no matter what journey you're on, because the first chapter basically starts off with what we are feeling right before our wife gives birth. We're like, oh my gosh, it's about to get real.
Mm.
And all those doubts that we don't say out loud, all those fears that we don't say out loud, and we tell everybody we're so excited and this is going to be fine and great and everything. And in the background of our mind and heart, we're like, oh my gosh, like what am I about ready to dive into here, right? And the book is really a guide to overcome all those fears, right? Not just all those fears from a theoretical level, but from like an everyday practical level. And I share stories in there of myself, from clients and everything else, of things that were done that weren't the greatest, and then things how we've recovered, and then things to do better, right? But the other thing too, from the spiritual piece, one thing I've really learned with my own faith-based journey, which is newer to me, I've always been a quote unquote faith-based person, but I haven't been deep into my faith like I have been for the past 4 years, is that I forgot that I don't have to do this alone.
Yeah.
I really, really don't. I actually have a heavenly Father and a guidebook called the Bible that I can go open up, and believe it or not, when you dissect those pages and those words, it is a wonderful, incredible guide for fatherhood and marriage and just guide for life. And what I do is in the spirit of fatherhood is I dissect those things along with the tactical things that we talk about and combine them together where you can use both of them, right? So it's really, whether you're newer to your faith, whether you're a deep-seated Christian, or you're like, you know what, I don't know anything about faith, but I'm really kind of curious of what it could look like. It's for you.
Mm.
Uh, so that it's got marriage elements in there. It's got parenting elements in there. It's got mindset elements in there, even your overall health and self-care. And most importantly too, like your relationship with your creator and what that could look like. And the final thing I'll say is this, I used to think that the Bible was so overwhelming, and it was so overwhelming. I didn't even want to dive into it. And what I've done in that book is I've really dissected a lot of scripture
Mm.
that you can like easily practically use when you're going through different seasons or different experiences as a man, husband, and father.
Well, good on you, bro, for really kind of digging into that. I know, I've in following you and listening to different things you've been putting out. I know that you've been digging deeper into your faith and digging deeper into that journey and what that means for you. And so kudos to you, man, for tying all those things together. No doubt it was a stretching experience for you, but I think it's a message that we need to hear as men. And I think a lot of men who maybe have come from a challenging upbringing with complicated relationships with their fathers. The beauty of this divine story is that our heavenly Father is the ultimate father. He's the ultimate definition of what grace, mercy, love, and
Yeah.
how to experience that. I mean, he is the pinnacle of perfection in fatherhood. And so it's whether you believe, whether you're a person of faith or not, even the principles in the Bible, if you simply just lived by the principles in the Word of God, you will live an incredible life. Even if you just lived how Jesus did. He was without sin. I mean, anyways, I don't want to turn this into a sermon, but you get my point. I'm excited to get my hands on it, and we're gonna, just at the end here, we're gonna talk about where people can find it. But I want to ask you one last question before we wrap it up here. Hey, we're going to get back to the episode, but while I have you here, I wanted to ask you, would you consider helping a brother who's struggling in his life right now? Maybe it's a guy searching the internet to help save his marriage, his health, or his family. Maybe it's a man that's just behind you on this journey. And we know, statistically speaking, there are thousands of men doing this, and we know that there are probably men in your social circles that are struggling with some of these very same things. If you'd be willing to help, this is how you can help, and I promise it'll take less than 60 seconds. If you've gotten any value from this podcast so far, would you be willing to give us an honest review and subscribe to our channel, whatever channel you're listening on? If you want to take this to the next level, would you consider sending this link to a friend of yours who you know would benefit from listening to this show? Now, why would you do that? Because the more men that hear this content, the more marriages we can save, the more fathers we can help step up, and the more lives that we can change forever. This isn't just for the men. This is for the wives, the children, and the generations to come. So I want to say thank you so much for doing your part to help other men find the support that they need. Now let's get back to it. And I ask everybody this question on my show. And so one thing about me is I think about my death often. I'm a little weird like that because I believe that when I think about the end of my life, it informs me on how I ought to live my life in the present, right? And so I want you to picture for a moment that you had passed away and your funeral has just happened. I want you to picture yourself sort of having this out of body experience. And so the funeral's over, everyone's left, and it's just your wife and your boys sitting around the table. And then they're just sharing stories about dad. They're sharing stories about the man that dad was. Your wife sharing stories about the husband you were, and your kids are talking about the life that you lived and the man that you were. And as you're sitting around, in spirit, listening to the narrative of this conversation, what are things that you would want your kids to say about the life that you lived and the man that you were?
Whew. Well, should we fly by the part where they're like just making fun of dumb stuff that I've done and idiotic things that I've said, and like, always dad could never find his keys and he was always looking for his phone, and like, he just was absent-minded sometimes, and like he had super skinny legs and all that stuff. Um,
Dad skipped leg
no,
day.
what's that?
I said, Dad skipped leg day.
Yeah, I know. What's funny is I had a horrific knee injury about 8 months ago, and my 16-year-old never like misses a beat to like tell me like your legs are really little now. I'm like, well, I'm trying, man. I'm on the road to recovery, bro. Okay, I'm doing my best.
Worst.
But anyway, I think uh, I think what I would want more than anything is that they knew that, man, this question is gonna make me cry. I've never been asked this question, and I'm visualizing it. Um, they, if it wasn't for my family, I wouldn't be here. I can tell you that wholeheartedly. So, um, the way that I look at them is they are the oxygen in my lungs, and without them, I can't breathe. You know, everything that I do, um, I do it for them, and everything that I do is to connect with them, even though sometimes I fall on my face. I think what they would do is, I think that they would share memories and experiences. Um, we have a saying in our house, and experiences over stuff, memories over stuff, and connection over anything. That's like our mission. That's our quote as a family. And I would much rather hang out with my kids and be in their life than anybody else's in my life and my wife. My wife jokes with me all the time. She's like, "Why don't you hang out with more friends?" I was like, "I hang out with them on the internet all day long. Like, I want to hang out with my family, you know." And she's like, "Well, you need more physical relationships." I was like, "I know, but I would much rather like be on a camping trip with all four of my boys, two of their friends. I'm going to be around four teenagers this weekend than any other place in the world.
Mm,
I would much rather do that than playing golf on a Saturday, which I can't stand playing golf unless I'm with my kids. Anything that I do, like anything, going to concerts, going on hikes, going on vacations, it's always with them because I always want like this arsenal and these deep pockets of memories. And I think what I truly want is for them to talk about those amazing memories and those experiences, and to know that like, man, like he was there and was he was in tow for my life constantly, and I was in tow with his, and we were always in lockstep.
mm,
Like there wasn't like this separate world of like, well, dad goes out and does this stuff and then he comes home. Kids go out and do this stuff and then he comes home. We've all been a very tight family, and I would want them to talk about those experiences and memories,
mm.
hopefully.
Wow. Larry, thank you so much for sharing such a big piece of your heart with us today. It's very clear to see that you love your family so much, and what an incredible testimony. that you've lived. What an incredible life that you're living, and an inspiration you are to thousands and thousands of men. Thank you so much, brother. Last thing, where can my guys get more of you? Where can we find you, follow you, take advantage of your services, what you're doing? Let us know.
Oh, thank you, man. I think the best way to start is the podcast. So you can download the podcast wherever you download podcasts. There's tons of shows. I've been doing this now for almost a decade. If you're interested in the book, you can go to thedadedge.com/spirit. You can find, I'm actually hosting a live Q&A on June 13th, at 7 PM. I have on there that if you buy the book, you'll get access to that Q&A. Truth be told, I don't care if you buy the book or not. Just put your name and email in there. You can join the Q&A. I don't care. Just come and hang out with me. That's fine. Whether you buy the book or not, I don't care. As far as just resources and that kind of thing, we actually have a resources tab where I've got like 21 Days to an Extraordinary Marriage. That's a free resource to guys. I have 25 intimate conversation starters. That's just an incredible, easy resource, free resource for you if you want to have better conversations with your wife. And then I even have a short training on what's called full focus parenting, full focus presence training, which is like, we live in a very distracted world, and it's a quick 15-minute with a PDF training on how we can like literally have our feet in our shoes and our heart-centered presence with our kids, no matter what hamster wheel in our mind decides to not stop when we want it to stop. So all kinds of those free resources are there for you for marriage and parenting. And then, if you want to come over and check out what we do in the mastermind, you can go to thedadedge.com/mastermind for that. We've got 2 different programs, one for business owners and one for non-business owners. So that's me. Whatever bucket you decided to do life with me in, I'm honored that you do life with me in any way, shape, or form. If I could just take a moment, for all you guys out there, if you're not following Mitch, this man puts out unbelievable content, unbelievable, heart-centered, beautiful, beautiful content. And I mean, I've been in this dad space for a while. I love everything you put out, man. Everything. And like, I'll tell you, I see a lot of your stuff right when I need to see it. And I'm just like, oh man, I really needed that today. So I just want to thank you for hosting that, for not only starting your Instagram account, but for really, pushing this forward, because I think what you're doing is great work as well. So thank you for doing that.
Hey, I'm glad you like it, and I'm happy to hear it resonates with you, man. That's what I live for. I'm here to help transform marriages and help transform relationships with kids. And when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. That's what I say. And so,
right.
Appreciate it, man. This has been a life-giving conversation. So have an incredible week, and we'll catch up soon.
You too, brother. Thank you.
All right. So there you have it. Listen, I hope you took something away from this episode, because we talked about a lot of great stuff. So just as a recap, we've got his podcast, his book coming out, Father's Day. It's coming out. It's called The Spirit of Fatherhood. He's got a ton of free resources on his website. He's got a mastermind you can join if you want. Of course, his Instagram. I'm going to put the links to all of it in the show notes below. And hey, if you're here and you're watching this on YouTube, let me know, what was your big takeaway from this episode? What's something that you heard today that you're like, man, I could apply this in my marriage tomorrow? Or maybe there's something that it was highlighted to you that you can grow in your marriage or in your fatherhood. Okay, hit me up in the comments at YouTube and let's start the conversation. Listen, it's been a great time today. We got some more incredible conversations coming up over the next couple weeks. So stay tuned in, stay locked in with me. We got some good stuff coming up. So that's all from me. So listen, I'm here for you. I believe in you. I am in your corner. All right. Have an incredible week. We'll catch up next Monday.